choose our chair. Yeah, please. So welcome everyone. These are all good friends with me on stage. Some people very close. Fariba is my partner, so we're really close. And and Stephen and Alan, we go back, I guess.
Yes.
79, I don't know, let's make the calculation, the 91 something. So, decades. Stephen, as a researcher with Stanford University for many years, kind of helped put these scientific imprimatur on the reality of, from the perspective of science, of lucid dreaming. So it was known a long time, but it was still debated, and your research helped kind of show that in the lab, when certain neural correlates or observation can be made, we can actually verify lucid dreaming. So you verified lucid dreaming, and that's I think was a main contribution for you in the sort of the unfolding of what we know about lucid dreaming. So thank you for doing this, and I think, you also are, Fariba tell me, like unspoken mystics. So you also come from that place, we would see, the place of spiritual inquiry, and that comes true in your book. And then what I'm interested in our conversation today is kind of to see where, when we bring those different perspectives together, the scientific and you might say the spiritual inquiry, what does it disclose about lucid dreaming? And Fariba, you're an artist. We thank you very much for your presentation just now, showing the sort of the subtle dimension of lucid dreaming that cannot be shown neither through science, neither through words, and the art can come to kind of help us connect and mirror back this the plenum of the phenomenology, the lived experience of lucid dreaming. So you are also a researcher, and you were part of Stephen LaBerge's team in the 80s and 90s. So you're also a scientific researcher, and you're a contemplative coming from the Persian tradition and shamanic practitioner and so on. So I will be interested to see what you have to say about bringing all of these dimensions together. So welcome. And Alan, for me, you represent the tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the transmission. As much as we speak of kind of meeting what comes up in terms of our own being with knowledge. So we start as a kid, with the template of whatever is my experience. But transmission is much bigger than us, and we meet transmission, and it also is being passed further. And I understand you as someone who really studied and can speak to us from the perspective of the transmission of the knowledge, especially within Tibetan Buddhism, and your contact with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and so on. And you also, as we saw yesterday, you are a researcher, you're a philosopher of science. So I'm also interested in thinking of how these deep form of inquiry kind of connects. And the topic today is about lucid dreaming. So, and it has its own ecology, we'd say, inside of the ecology of consciousness, because we connect dreaming with the fullness of kind of the unconscious arising within us, but with a particular dimension of cognizance and inside of it. So here we are. This is my introduction to you, so welcome. And so my first question has to do with, the mind is somewhat psychedelic in a sense, or self-organizing. The way you answer, the way you pose a question will make the phenomenon reveal in a particular way. Yeah. So each one of you kind of have a particular perspective towards lucid dreaming. So I want to go around and for us to hear from you, you know, like, what is your personal quest? How did you come to lucid dreaming? And how does it shape how you see it? And I thought that maybe Fariba, you could speak first, and then we, yeah?
But before, just a little meta comment. Can we have more light, please? Yeah, looks. I mean, I can't see anyone out there, you know. So, and there's no reason, you know, just to have us illuminated when you're not really.
So in this dream, also, you are illuminated. Very good. Thank you. That was
good. That's better. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that.
Is my microphone working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Only if you're speaking.
We go a long way. So it's like jokes. I grew up with Stephen. So. Well, I came to lucid dreaming. In some ways, lucid dreaming came to me. I was having a very hard time with high fever when I was 7 years old for 6 weeks, and they didn't know what it was. So I was quarantined for 6 weeks. And every time I would fall asleep, I had a fear of death, that I would not wake up. But after about 3, 4, or 5 days, or about a week, I realized I am waking up. So I started to face death very early on and question it at a very young age. But what happened was the first stage of going to sleep, hypnagogia or shamatha, that stage of consciousness became an occasion for me to witness while I was falling asleep, because I was afraid of dying. So I wanted to be awake when I'm going to sleep. So that became an occasion for me to learn lucid dreaming. Of course, I didn't know the name. But then later on, I became a good lucid dreamer, just doing that from the beginning. I was interested in contemplative practices. I started with Zen Buddhism, went to Theravada, then went to Tibetan. I was just inquiring quite a bit about the mind. And then there were two topics that really interested me when I was a teenager, actually. One was, if we die in our dream, do we actually die? So that was my own personal experience facing death so early. The other one was about the question of God. If we seek God in our dreams, how do we experience God? Now that became the topic of my master's thesis, which I met Stephen LaBerge in 1985 at a conference, and we were just strolling in the campus, and we talked about it, and he says, well, if you want to do research on lucid dreaming, come and join my team at Stanford. So I packed my bag and I came and joined him, and it was very interesting because that topic, lucid dreaming, he was trying to convince to the world, even to the dreaming world, that lucid dreaming was a viable state, let alone talking about spiritual experiences in lucid dreaming. So he recommended me to a school to go and do my master's there, so Stanford would not go for that. So I did my master's thesis on experiencing the divine in lucid dream state, and I don't know if I get an occasion to talk about it later, but that occasion was quite transformative for me, because it was a quantitative research, and we worked quite a bit together on a weekly dialogue about how to set up the experiment too. So that was so life transforming for me, because I thought, how dare for me to go and ask people to incubate God in their dreams if I don't do as deeply of an experience myself. So I went on a 2.5 years of semi-retreat, and I kept incubating and incubating and incubating it. And within that incubation, I met a Tibetan Lama, which I met 12, 13 years after that. It was Lama Tarchen Rinpoche.
Oh, yeah.
In my dreams.
That's it.
And then he was teaching me how to go to the next step, and I had never met him. So what happened was that it actually put me into crisis as a researcher. Because I was trying to be very objective. That's what I was trained to be, very objective, and then there I am. And I think that I've never got over it. So I went from quantitative research to deeply embracing phenomenology to do my other research, and then now in the past 15 years I've been doing art-based research, because I'm only interested really in one thing, but I'm trying to find different methods to go about it. Mm-hmm. It's what we're talking about emptiness, it's talking about awareness, it's talking about that really deep state of consciousness. So that's how I started, and that's how it led me to meeting people and doing research, and I can maybe say a little bit about it later, about the research itself.
Yeah. So, how did I get involved with it? It's hard to say, really, how these things happen. A combination of events, just to pick a few of them. The most, I suppose, essential point was that I came to California as a graduate student in chemical physics in 1967. And so I had no interest in the mind, no interest in spirituality. I was definitely a full-bore atheist, and because I thought religion was for people who couldn't think straight. And that's a reasonable view for a 9-year-old, sure, but somehow I got involved with what was going on in the Bay Area in those days, and became fascinated with the topic of...
Is that a code word for psychedelics?
It is. Okay. And so I had done a year's work, passed all my qualifiers, and done all the coursework for my PhD in chemical physics, and now I had to get a dissertation topic. And I could not find anything that I wanted to do except for the chemistry of the mind. Say, how does what's going on, obviously on the level of chemistry, quantum chemistry, no doubt, how does that connect to this wonderful transformative view of reality that I was experiencing? That's what, doing anything else would be just pointless. But of course, every professor I went to talking this over with said, oh, no, you can't do that, but you're certainly welcome to work on this, quantum catalysis or whatever the stuff was, something else. And so I decided I'd take a leave of absence and try to find the deeper spiritual value that I'd recently been open to, and looked into all kinds of different spiritual paths and techniques, ranging from yoga to Fritz Perls' dream work, and tried a little bit of everything, more or less. Yet, I knew I wanted to study consciousness, and decided after a while that I wasn't going to be Bob Dylan again. So that instead I had to find a way to use my abilities in science to work on the topic that mattered the most to me. And so how to study consciousness. And because Stanford has a very wonderfully flexible program that if a person is in good standing, past all the requirements for a PhD in any subject, they can make, in theory, an interdisciplinary topic. So I worked on several options, starting with general system science, sort of catastrophe theory, what became later chaos theory, all of which they were too theoretical really, but I finally ended up in the third time with lucid dreaming as a topic. And as I mentioned yesterday, that I wanted to study consciousness, but it was not allowed. You couldn't directly study consciousness in those days in the U.S. academic establishment. It just wasn't done. And so, but observed that there was the angle that you could do. You could take dream work. So in dream research, people are studying consciousness, and exactly in the form of studying the relationship between what happened in the reports from consciousness in their dream experience and connecting that with what was going on in the brain and body and the nervous system. So, which is to say, psychophysiology, which is this not really a mysterious topic as we seemed to think yesterday, simply taking equally, with equal validity, the inner experience, whatever happens in the mind, plus the physiological correlates of that, and seeing how they interrelate. It also provided a way of providing some additional validation or verification of the subjective report. One of the problems with the subjective report in terms of most science's view on it is that it's difficult to check, to know whether it's accurate or not, because we do know that we have fantasies, make things up, have false memories, and so on. So how do you know that the experience you're having that you report waking up from a dream actually happened then, or happened the way you thought it was? And the answer was it can be done by the fact that there is a strong connection. For example, if I look in my dream to the left and then to the right, the eyes, in my eyes, I should say, in the sleeping body move to the left and then the right, and that's objectively measurable in this world. So I then use the method of having a particular pattern of eye movements or muscle clenches, but a pattern that would have a relationship with the rest of the...
So the beauty of this approach in a way is that it kind of merges what is observable, and that was a creative spark of your dissertation. Like, what would be the observable thing that we can actually pin to the inner experience of lucidity? And then you were able to kind of like marry those two, and that, kind of released us from questioning it in a way.
Yeah, well, it should have, of course, and it did for many of us. There's still some people who just, I don't care what the evidence is, I'm not going to believe it.
Yeah.
But the thing I wanted to say about this is that's what got me started in the topic, saying is I want to study consciousness and I have an interest in this. But what I found first problem is I had to be the subject, first of all, because I didn't have anyone else that I could find to do this. So I had to learn how to have lucid dreams myself. So I worked on and stumbled in the dark until I actually found a key to lucid dreaming, which is remembering to do something. And that allowed me to have lucid dreams at will. So then I started to have very frequent lucid dreams. And as I did that, then something else opened up, and that was that there was an inner spiritual value to it, that the state wasn't just something of scientific interest, but for me, the experiencer, there was a great value. And I found that came from paying attention to what occurred in the dreams, and, for example, dealing with nightmares in a direct way instead of flying away and escaping them, face them and going straight forward. And the odd thing about this teacher in the dream is I mentioned that I got set on the right path after 40 lucid dreams going the wrong direction, of flying away from danger when I realized I'm dreaming, to the teacher, Idris Shah, in the dream saying, too bad, Stephen, good that he could fly, but too bad that he didn't realize that because it was a dream, there's nothing to flee. And therefore, I got the message, doesn't make sense. And I made an entirely different path of focusing on the fears and going into them and dealing with them instead of avoiding them better. And that one little piece of advice, from who knows where, but it seemed to be from the teacher, changed my life in a way.
Yeah, wonderful. And maybe this could be a good segue, because I wanted to bring you here in the conversation, because you both mentioned teachers. Fascinating. And I know you've been working, I pegged you here as the person with transmission and people who work with teachers. So maybe you can illuminate us from your personal experience of what it was for you as well, and if you met teacher, inner teacher, outside teacher, and so on.
Yeah, you've nailed me. I'm passing on transmission. And yet the delightful thing about transmission is it's not simply passing on luggage, from generation to generation. I just rather put it on the hard drive and say, look at the hard drive. That's all it is. But the whole notion of transmission is you are receiving the transmission from very realized beings for generations back, but each generation, while you're maintaining a core, it's also adapting, evolving, attending to the surrounding environment. So it is a type of evolution, while maintaining the identity of the transmission that you are indeed preserving and transmitting. So my short story, I was raised in a very religious background. This is not going to be very long. I'm going to zip through 40, 50 years very quickly. But my father's a theologian, so I got a great big dose of Christianity until I was 18 and finally escaped. And it was mainstream Protestant Christianity, which has many, many merits, and really offers a life of meaning. There's no question about it. Here's a way to live a meaningful life. Listen to the teachings of Jesus, emulate the life of Jesus, follow the ideals that he teaches. I cannot doubt that that is meaningful. But from the age of 13, I had a marvelous science teacher, and I knew I wanted to follow a career in science. And that persisted all the way through. The problem was there didn't seem to be any intersection at all between this whole Christian worldview and the science that I was going to devote my life to. And so in this increasing frustration through my teens, something had crystallized for me, and that is two aspirations that are intermingled, but they're not quite identical. And that is a passionate yearning to live a meaningful life, but also to live an authentic life. And that is one to the best of my ability in accordance with truth. My problem with the version of Christianity to which I've been exposed was, although I found great meaning, there are certain key elements of their creed that I just could not see as true. I'm not saying they're not true, they didn't make any sense to me, and I couldn't see them as true. And then I looked to science, and there's an enormous amount of truth, and I couldn't find any meaning at all. I mean, nothing. You know, lots of data points, lots of understanding, but in terms of any kind of fulfillment, transformation, awakening, zip, nada, nothing at all. And so that set me out of that jettisoned me out of Western civilization. Because those were the two big things. You know? Wow.
Seeking meaning and spiral out.
If there was another planet to go to, I would have explored that, but I did basically this, close as you can go to that. I then immersed myself in a culture that was extremely rich and empirical and irrational and had essentially no contact with Western civilization at all, and that was that of Tibet. So the first 20 years, now really quickly, is I was then exposed to, within Tibetan Buddhism, living in Dharamsala. The Dalai Lama became my primary teacher 44 years ago. A truly empirical, very, very rational, profoundly spiritual way of viewing reality, understanding the mind, transforming, setting out on a path of awakening. And it was from the vantage point, it was being taught to me as a sentient being, it was taught to me as a person who is not enlightened, which is a very good way to start. And so the question being posed in that whole first 20 years of training is, you're suffering, you have the internal causes of suffering, you're very limited, you're cramped, you're claustrophobic, caught up in a network of I, me, mine. What can I do to extricate myself from suffering and the causes of suffering? I think it's a good question. And boy, they gave me a lot of things to do. You know, for 20 years, there's a lot of things to do. And by the 20 years, from 1970 to 1990, I think I kind of know the ropes now. And it was kind of starting to plateau. So now it's 1990. And that's just about the time, fall of 1989, that I matriculated for my graduate studies at Stanford. That was exactly the time that I connected with now one of my absolutely primary teachers, the Venerable Gyatso Rinpoche, transmission. And this is Dzogchen, the Great Perfection School, which I've been following with great passion ever since. And a different question is posed. And that is, yes, I'm experiencing suffering. My mind is on occasion dominated by mental afflictions like craving, hostility, greed, selfishness, and so forth. Yes, that's true. But the question is different. And that is, what am I doing that's perpetuating the mess? And how can I stop? Right? And so the Dzogchen, this Great Perfection School, approaches the whole issue from a different perspective, and that is, it looks right through, almost like with X-ray vision. And so if I were a Buddha, I would look at you and I would say, aha, I see Daniel the Buddha. I'm not oblivious to the fact that you may very well be a sentient being, but I'm seeing through the veneer, through the cloud layer, and I'm seeing one who right now is in fact fully awakened. And so now how can I wake you up to who you already are and not simply who you could be in the future? Well, so I'm about to wrap up. So this is 1990. The first teachings I received from Gyatso Rinpoche were on dream yoga. Dream yoga, the very first one. I'd known him for some years prior to that point. I received those teachings, and although I'd received teachings on dream yoga years before, This was the first time they really struck me as practical and something I could really deeply integrate into my practice. It was not long after that I met Stephen, because he was there at Stanford at the same time. So we connected. It's been a long friendship ever since. But now just to go to lucid dreaming briefly, because I'd like to continue the conversation here. In that first 20 years, the theme that comes up very repeatedly is that this experience we are having right now, that we euphemistically call being awake, is in fact like a dream. Like a dream. That's this theme that goes all the way through, in the sense that in a dream, if I'm looking at you, in a dream, you appear to be totally from your own side. I mean, I'm simply witnessing you, but you're already there. And that confirms it. You are really there, you know? What touching is believing, right? You're firm, you're solid. And that's how it appears in a dream. But once you're awake, you know that was all an illusion. Yes, you can reach out and touch. Yes, I don't know what you're going to say next or what your facial expression will be. And nevertheless, you are not there from your own side, independent. This is utterly an entangled relationship. So in that theme, waking experience is dreamlike. But the last 25 years, because I've been really in this stream ever since, is there is a perspective from which it is true to say, right now we are dreaming. It's not that simply this is like a dream, this is a dream. And that really constitutes the core of daytime dream yoga. And the final point is nighttime. So Stephen and I have done a half-dozen 10-day workshops together, to my great delight. And it's really deeply impressed upon me that the lucid dream is the optimal laboratory for studying the mind. And that's the way dream yoga is presented, is here's one launching pad. You have the launching pad of daytime practice, the launching pad of dream yoga, the launching pad of the bardo, after you're dead prior to your next embodiment. That's also a launching pad. In what text that I've translated, Padmasambhava gives 6 launching pads, that this can be the place of liftoff. And dream yoga is one of those. And it's the perfect laboratory for studying the mind and multiple dimensions of consciousness, because everything you're experiencing in a dream, and most explicitly in a lucid dream, everything you're experiencing is only mind. There are no atoms there, no laws of physics, no chemistry. It is purely mind. And so if you're a physicist, your laboratory is created entirely out of physical stuff. Your laboratory is made out of atoms. Very cool. So throw a rock in any direction and you hit something physical. Throw a rock in any direction in a dream and you hit something mental. And the rock itself is mental. So it's a perfect laboratory.
So that's beautiful, and maybe we can kind of move with this metaphor in the sense that you're telling us that dreaming is like a laboratory, a platform for an inquiry, possibly an inquiry towards self-knowing, self-realization. Absolutely. I mean, I'm assuming that there's a kind of a goal inside of this. So my second question to all of you is like, well, you are now in the laboratory. So you're asking those questions. What did lucid dreaming, both from your perspective as a researcher and a dreamer, what did it disclose to you? So, yeah.
Well, I have to go first to my research, and because that really illuminated quite a bit for me. When I was doing this research on the spiritual experiences in lucid dreaming, I had a 2 weeks incubation period where people put an intention that tonight when I'm dreaming, I want to experience the divine, or I want to see God, or the highest. I was interested to see if I am putting that intention, would my experience be the same as if Stephen or Alan or other people would? What would the mind present itself when you ask the highest question from yourself, the most existential question? What's the meaning of life? What's the nature of the mind? The big question. I was interested because when it had a little bit of a background, cultural background, because the cultural background or the religious background I came from before I started to study Buddhism was the Baha'i faith. And within the Baha'i faith, there was no sense of there is a personalized God out there. It was more close to Sufism where there's an essence. So I did not have that image, and I did not grow up with it until I came to England, and I went to a church, and I saw a man with a beard, and then I saw the image of Christ, and I thought, wow, this is interesting. I got exposed to the Western. I was very young. I was 18, and I was being exposed to the images, the religious images of Christianity and other religions. Then that question came to mind, that, well, if I'm experiencing or think that God is an essence, and they feel that way, but where's the unity of God, or where's the unity of consciousness if we're all divided in that way? So that question was really the root behind that research. So what I realized, which now still stays with me as an inquiry, is the research showed that it depends on our core belief. Whatever is our core belief, if we put that intention, we tend to experience something similar to what our core belief is. So our presupposition and assumptions has a great impact on our experiences. So that was the first thing. And the second thing I found out is that the way in which the wording in which we use, it impacts our behavior in dreams. And that made me very careful about what I say from then on. That if I say a word like, I seek the divine, and then I become lucid in a dream, and I know this is a dream, and so while I'm seeking the divine, I start getting up and looking for the divine. Whereas if I say I'm experiencing the divine, I would be standing back and letting something happen to me. So I thought that was really fascinating to see, and it was a pretty good data to show the correlation. So then I continued on, and this notion of, if I become lucid in a dream, if I let it happen, let things happen without me interacting with it, and just look and witness the nature of my mind and see what my mind presents itself, that became an important thing, because I started to experience unexpected imagery, unexpected experiences beyond my comprehension. And then having this wonderful experience I had when I was doing this research of visiting, I used to call him my dream lama. I didn't know who he was. I thought it was Kalya Rinpoche. I went and met Kalya Rinpoche. I thought it was him. So no, it's not Kalya Rinpoche. And when I met Lama Tarchen Rinpoche, it was very interesting. 12 years after I had the dream about him, I met him, and he came right straight to me, and he said, I have met you somewhere. And I looked at him right to his eyes, and I said, you've been coming to my dreams for years and teaching me. And then he looked at me and said, oh, that's where I met you. I had never really submitted myself to any religious system, but I took refuge with him, and I studied with him for 10 years, and we ended up co-teaching dream yoga and lucid dreaming together. It was a pleasure to be with him and learn about the system of Tibetan Buddhism from that perspective. But for me, what is disclosing is, my interest is more of the non-representational, beyond the narrative form. I like to go to spaces where there is experiences where I don't have any reference for it in waking. And going there, do you hear me?
It's good.
Going into those experiences, there's a whole list of criteria, let's put it that way. One has to really face fear. One has to have some level of contemplative practices. And one should not be even afraid of dissolving the self to be in that space. And for me, what is disclosing is that when we talk about void and emptiness, or when we talk about luminosity, is that there is something about sustainability. If we are able to sustain that state of consciousness, something often arises in that state. But then if we sustain it even further, when there's nothing arises, that's what I discovered. For me, the disclosure is that that's the seed of wisdom. That's where the seed of wisdom is. There's nothing about, oh, I'm inspired or anything. There's something changes in oneself. The perception shifts. So I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago, 40 years ago when I started this practice. I'm a different person. My perception has changed. If my perception changes, my reality changes, my reality changes, my behavior changes, my behavior changes, if my environment changes, everything changes. So for me, what the lucid dreaming practice has disclosed for me is that if one really stays, I call it the practice, if one really stays with the practice and go deeper and deeper, and the laboratory is right here, and the observation is all happening here, is that there is something vast inside of ourselves. That's where the wisdom lies. That's what it has displayed for me. And so I feel like the treasure revealers is finding the treasure there. So that's
Thank
for
you.
me.
Après toi.
Après
Okay.
toi.
Yes. It's a difficult question because what have I learned from lucid dreaming? Because there's so many different levels that you could address that on. And Fariba, I think, is just a wonderful job of talking about the highest level. And I've mentioned this already as well. And so I'll say, certainly, there's the opportunity for the direct experience of what there is beyond the dream somehow. What you get when you remove all dream-like experience, which is to say, anything that you're experiencing then could change, because the thing that we're wanting to experience is beyond that, so you have to remove what's preventing you from seeing it first. But I wanted to mention that there are many other levels that, over the years, that I found teachings in by paying attention to what was going on in my dreams and how to best respond to it. Simply having the practice of have a dream, do whatever I think is right in it, but then after, when I wake up, reflect on it. Say, could I do better? Was I happy with that response? And if not, change it and say, next time I'm in that situation, namely a lucid dream, I'm going to do something in accordance with my new view of what should work better. Now, this is something when I said that I learned to have lucid dreams at will. And when this was occurring, I was having many lucid dreams. So I was having nightly lucid dreams, often several a night. And so this meant that I had enough continuity in the practice that I could have an experience last night and say, oh, that wasn't quite right. I'm going to try to do something different next time. And tonight, have an opportunity to do so. And so, as opposed to if it's another 2 months before it happens again, you just can't maintain the continuity. And so the growth doesn't happen in the same way. So a high frequency of lucid dreaming has that value because it gives you an occasion, for that persistent state. It's also something that Fariba mentioned that is very important, is that you can realize some oddity occurs in your dream, and you say, oh, this is a dream. And then often you might then get re-involved in the dream and forget what you knew a moment ago. So you have to learn to develop a sustained awareness so that it's like a persistent vigilance, but it's not something that's held on tightly. It's something that Alan knows well from many meditative practices, which are about that kind of attention, that sustained attention that is not too grasping, because that causes awakening. So it's a kind of natural training to observe what puts me to sleep, what causes me to lose lucidity, and then you recognize certain attitudes of getting absorbed in the dream, getting involved in a way that you forget yourself. So it's as if there's two directions in life in general, but lucid dreaming has, first, we see what is in front of us, and that's what the object of attention. That's what we normally are focused on. That's the figure, and the ground is the rest, including the who is aware. So we develop a double direction of attention. So part of the attention is on the self and on the observer, and the other part is on the activity. And so you then have something new in an ordinary dream where you don't know you're dreaming. It's as if right now, we find ourselves contained in a room. Here I am doing something, I'm sitting, I'm talking, I'm in this room, though, certainly contained in me. But that is what I'd call the actor role. So I'm playing a role, I'm doing something, but I'm definitely engaged in this world. So I'm interacting with it, and that's what makes it seem real, is the interaction. But then, when I realize I'm dreaming, I wake up in the sense that I remember another level of being, that there is more to me, there's more to this situation than just the actor in this room. And I think more deeply say, okay, I'm contained in the room. Yes, but isn't all this dream, the entire world, the dream, contained in my mind? Yes, so now it seems I have two levels of awareness. One is within the dream as the actor, and the other is an observer that transcends the dream, that's meta to the dream. And the balance of those two levels is the important factor that allows one to develop a more sophisticated sense of lucidity, to be able really to make the most of the experience, to be most flexible and creative without either, on one hand, becoming fully absorbed and losing your perspective, or on the other hand, being so detached that you don't really care about what's going on in the dream world. So this is not, the ideal is not to be only the observer. And then all the stuff going on, it's not my issue, it's not my problem, I don't care, but instead to be in the dream, but not of it. And so that here you are, acting in the dream with the most understanding and compassion and all of your ideals, but not identifying fully with that level. Instead, you've got the higher level. And so that idea of those two different levels interacting has been very important in my understanding. So that's one of the elements that you get. There are many other levels that we probably won't have time to talk about, but just to name one, just to give you a sense of consciousness. What does it show us about it? For example, it shows us that the just-in-time constructive nature of consciousness, so not talking in complex stuff, simple stuff. I see a glass over there. The simple example, I walk in the house and there's the answer machine, a little black box with a red LED blinking. I've got a message, so I want to go get the message. I'm walking over to push. There are no buttons on this. Oh, there they are. Just in time, almost just in time. Because so we're seeing the constructive process that we don't see the buttons until we need the buttons. So we see the details in our consciousness when we need details. Right now we seem to see all this complexity. I see many people. Do I? Or do I see the idea of many people? It's not until I look at one particular individual that I could tell you what color their eyes were, because I don't know. I think I know everybody's in color there, but I don't know that. And we see in the dream, we see the constructive process happening right in front of our, quote, eyes. And that then gives you a different perspective on how the construction of consciousness occurs. And from all this, you certainly come to the point of view, of course this is a dream. What else would it be? It's a dream. That's what consciousness is. It's not the whole story. It's a dream about what? What's the meaning of the dream? What is it telling you? Is it a matter of wisdom or not? But it is certainly, in a sense, it's a kind of an illusion. It's like it's all on television. Like this must be.
Well, beautiful, the idea of, double dimension of our own engagement, the engagement with the inner and the outer. So I wonder what you have to offer.
It really seems to me like there's one person here speaking with four voices, yes. Which is very cool. But I never know what they're going to say. And this reminds me of one of my earliest dreams. It was decades ago. It was one of those that was very clearly lucid. And I want to give a whole build-up, but I found myself in a diner, 1950s-style diner. Mm-hmm. And as so often happens when you become lucid, there's a sense of euphoria. It's a kind of a genuine happiness. It's not something that something in the dream is making you happy. It's a kind of euphoria you're bringing to the dream because you get it. You know, it's really, everybody who's experienced it knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm walking into this diner, and an awakened being, you know, like, hallelujah, I've seen the light. This is a dream. And I was so thrilled. It brought out the evangelist in me. Not to convert to any creed, because I always found that repugnant. But, you know, if you're awake, you want everybody to be awake. How can you, you know, it's better. And so I went around the diner to one person after another, and I said, do you know this is a dream? And they're all hunched over their hamburgers and their Coke and French fries, you know. And I went from one person to another after another in the dream, and not one person had any interest in what I was saying. They were much more interested in the hamburgers and French fries. And they said, and that surprised the heck out of me. I thought, this is my dream. Don't you know this is my dream? You should be, you know, I'm awake.
Come with the program.
And so that came as a real eye-opener. That all of these individuals, and they didn't respond in exactly the same way, they looked differently and so forth and so on. This was the society of my mind.
Yes.
And they acted even though I was lucid, they acted in unpredictable ways.
Yeah.
So there are now big parallel here. And that is, I'll use Buddhist terminology, this dreamscape was my individual, it was not a transcendent dream, I didn't have, you know, enlightened beings coming in, it was a bunch of people hunched over hamburgers, you know. That whole dreamscape, this was like in the holodeck, and if you're a Star Trekkie, this was my holodeck, the substrate consciousness, and all these appearances of people were arising within this individuated space of my mind, because I didn't know that anybody was peeking in. And so, in a non-lucid dream, the people seem radically other, and therefore we're afraid of them, we're attracted to them, we're indifferent, and so forth and so on, but they seem radically other. When you become awake within the dream, you can still be identifying more with yourself, that dream persona. I'm over here, and why aren't you responding to my great enlightening talk that this is a dream? Why are you not doing that? I'm identifying with this one here and wondering why this one over here is not as awakened as I am, right? Or not as interested as I am. But then as you mature in the dream yoga practice, then you learn how to release the tentacles of identification that this persona here is actually no more or less me than that persona there, that persona there, that persona there. They're all coming from the same ground, and they're all equally me. Now let's bring that to the waking state. Because when the substrate consciousness, this is not divine, it's not rikpa, it's not transcendent, it's simply an individuated stream of consciousness, but it is a substrate consciousness. It is that out of which the persona that we wake up with every morning arises, the persona from dream to dream.
So the substrate consciousness will be the consciousnness that you have of me being Daniel Delaurier or you being Alan Wallace.
Yeah, I just mentioned just briefly, that is, it's the consciousness that remains when you're in deep dreamless sleep. And that's when it's just quiet. It's like a Lamborghini with 16 cylinders that's just idling. And then you turn it on. You put it into gear, and suddenly the holodeck turns on, and whoosh, you've got yourself a whole world there. Yeah? It's what's left over. But the substrate consciousness, this is not identical to what Stephen was calling awareness yesterday, and that's a perfectly good translation of the Rikpa, but I generally add the adjective pristine awareness, just so we know it's not just utterly ordinary awareness. But in this waking state, which again from the Dzogchen perspective, from enlightened perspective, this is a dream. Once again, insofar as we are non-lucid in the waking state, then once again everybody appears to be radically different and attracted here, afraid here, angry there, and so forth and so on. But if one cuts through not only the coarse mind, but the ordinary mind of the psyche of the waking state, but cuts through the substrate consciousness, breaks through, melts through, releases through, because it's not a machete problem. It's a total release of identification even with the substrate consciousness. A release of all grasping, all identification, all reification of my substrate consciousness as being something discrete, inherently existent. Release that. Then from this perspective, now once again, all of this in the waking state is an expression of one mind. Pristine awareness, primordial consciousness. This is the great, the great convergence point, I think, of all the mystical traditions of the world. And insofar as one releases the identification to this persona in the waking state, then you see everyone is me. So I'm going to end on this note. I have not been able to track who said this. It might have even been Nisargadatta Maharaj. But when I view the world with the eyes of wisdom, I see that I am nothing. When I view the world with the eyes of compassion, I see that I'm everything. And so that entanglement between the two, it makes dream yoga really mesh entirely with the rest of this deepest view of reality itself.
Wow.
Alan, that's a fascinating activity in the dream to attempt to bring awareness to other dream figures in a way. And I think everybody has done it. And starting with, as you say, this is a dream. Much better than, you're all in my dream. Did you know that? So at least this is a dream, sort of puts us in the same boat, we might say, even though it is an empty boat. So.
We tried that in the laboratory many times, trying to have people convince other people, and we had a hard time. The only person I was able to convince in a lucid dream, that is lucid, is Daniel. and then he willed it in the dream, says, well, let's fly. So he held my hand and tried to fly, and we got stuck on the wall. then I start asking the question, whose will was that?
Yes.
It's a lot of interesting question about whose will is it. And if in Gestalt, they talk about, in Gestalt, every aspect of dreams is part of ourselves. Why is it that those aspects are not awakened, but one aspect is awakened?
Right. So fascinating.
Yes.
Alan's dream seemed to be an expression of the Buddhist ideal of all of us must know. You are starting with, here I've got this knowledge, and I want to extend it to all of these beings. But where are they at this point? Where I was a few minutes ago, essentially. So there's the challenge, is how to do that. And it's a fun exercise in the lucid dream, is to find a way that you actually can have the appearance, at least, of the other figures go along with it and open to that, act as if they know it's a dream. And it's more like you have to, the cooperative way of say, you're not going to just simply believe this is a dream. Instead, hey, let me show you something. Step in the air here with me. How do you think we're doing that? Oh, it's because it's a dream. So you give time for it to develop.
Well, this is the interesting point for me, and that was, how I kind of structured our conversation. I hope we had like another 20 minutes, but let's say that there's a meme around lucid dreaming, that this is something that we can do individually, and then suddenly when we realize that we can do that individually, that's something that we can do collectively. That, a little bit of that dimension of this kind of self-other entanglement inside the dream and also inside the lucid waking. Now, knowing that lucid dreaming, you all have contributed to, let's say, the meme of lucid dreaming in the world right now, by your publications, by your talks, by teaching people how to do so, by doing the transmission of dream yoga. I'm sort of interested in kind of like the future of lucid dreaming. Do you see that maybe we are? I'm going towards, what will be a collective lucid dreaming? Are we going towards that? It's an open question, and what would it look like when we say it's not just my dream here, it's our dream, and then we come to that realization kind of together. So, but that's my perception of maybe what the future of lucid dreaming would be. I wonder if you think about this from, not just from the perspective of personal development, but from kind of the perspective of how it kind of overflows into the world. Lucid dreaming overflows into the world.
Well, we have been involved with this practice for so many years that we've gone from not being at all seen or acknowledged to suddenly it's become mainstream. when my cousin tells me, have you ever heard of lucid dreaming? I know it's mainstream.
Inception,
Inception.
The movie.
When we walked out of, we went and saw Inception together. When we walked out, Daniel said, that was an interesting movie. I said, you have no idea what this movie just did to the world of lucid dreaming. And so it's now out there. Because of the time, I will just be very short to say that the practice of lucid dreaming, the dream yoga, which is lucid dreaming, is part of that practice. It's a practice of lucid waking. It's a practice of being awake here. All the practices that we do to become lucid in a dream, it pertains to this state of consciousness. So I think that by people getting interested in lucid dreaming, they're starting to ask questions. So the inquiry is going to be more and more about consciousness, about waking up. And in my courses, when I mainly teach in academic courses, and what I teach my students is that it's not just becoming lucid in your dreams. Look at lucidity in many different aspects of one's life, from relationships, from work, from physical, from environment, from social, from political, is a form of waking up to really see what's going on. So I see it as a very positive movement, that people are really interested in it, and it's almost like a global awakening to start inquiring. At least that's what I'm seeing is happening. I'm hoping that's happening.
Sure. Alan, have you got something to add?
Yeah,
Sure. I've been participating in research with neuroscientists, psychologists now for 23 years. And so I think I have some sense of what they're good at and what they're not good at. They're good at many, many things I have no skills at all. But what's really struck me about the modern cognitive sciences in mainstream academia is they're still stuck in 19th century physics. Because you can get and it's just literally true, you can get a PhD in psychology, cognitive psychology, or cognitive neuroscience and so on, and never study 20th century physics at all. And they're simply assuming that's irrelevant, quantum mechanics and so forth. That's a rather big assumption. So I find it frustrating, because my training in science has been in physics, and I went directly to, with the foundation, I went to quantum mechanics. And so I think we've all noted, starting with Donald Hoffman a couple of days ago, that the whole mind-body issue, just what's the relationship, has been stagnating for more than 100 years. The nature of the correlations, it's not only that they don't know, they're not making any progress, and they don't even have any good ideas. Just a whole bunch of assumptions they're falsely presenting a scientific fact. So that's a problem. But there's a parallel, and that is ever since about 1925, there's been this measurement problem in quantum mechanics. What's the role of the observer? Because it does play a role, and that's also made no progress. It's 90 years. It really has been no progress at all. Where this gets interesting to my mind, there could be some profound synthesis, because these are, of course, dealing with the same issue. What's the nature of consciousness? What's the nature of the observer? And the neuroscientists don't know.
The dreamlike nature of research, basically.
There we go. But we have these two disparate fields that have been stagnant, in some ways making tremendous progress. I never want to deprecate. But in some ways, it's simply a factual statement. No progress on understanding the relationship between mind and brain, and no progress in understanding what's the role of the observer in so-called collapsing the wave function or not. But where it gets interesting, and I'll be very quickly here, is where you take the principles of quantum mechanics, and instead of thinking, okay, we have a quantum system here, protect it from the surrounding environment, because then all the cool quantum effects will dissipate away, turn it 180 degrees around, and this is what the great physicist John Wheeler did. Let us just turn it all around and assume the entire universe is a quantum system. What comes out of the mathematics, so it's hard science. This is not New Agey interpretation. This is a man of the same status as Richard Feynman, right? John Archibald Wheeler. He said, when you look at the mathematics of it, they took the Schrödinger wave equation and applied it to the entire universe. If you take out what John Wheeler called the observer participant, you have a problem of frozen time. The universe does not evolve, it does not change, nothing happens. You have a perfect symmetry, which is absolutely still, stagnant, unmoving. You need to, and there's no time. It's frozen time, which means there is no universe happening. Introduce something into the equation, and that is the observer participant, and what the observer participant does is say, now. It is a conceptual designation, it's an intrusion, it's an intervention into this smooth symmetry, and by saying now relative to now, there's tomorrow, there's yesterday, there's future and past, and now you have a universe that evolves. No observer participant, no universe, and no time, right? So what I've reflected upon this with tremendous enthusiasm for a number of years now, reading one paper after another, and what really comes out of this for me is that there is not a universe that we're all looking at as it's already out there, and we're looking at it from multiple perspectives and trying to map it with the scientific world that represents what's already there. But rather, there's one universe for every sentient being. You're in the center of your universe, but of course, this is not solipsism. It's absurd to think that Stephen is any less real than me. That's just flat out silly, so I'm not going to go there. But Steve is in the center of his universe, and Fariba is in the center of her universe, and our universes are entangled. And so this is my dream from my perspective, and it's your dream from your perspective, and our dreams are entangled. And isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
And in the pursuit of time, now is the end. So I want to thank you all for this wonderful conversation. Stephen,
I'm past the end. Yeah.
you're past the end.
Let
Yes.
me just add one
Okay,
little
Stephen.
piece of good news about what Alan was suggesting is the future of lucid dreaming, where we all are able to be fully lucid in the dream, and then we can somehow share the dreams. We can interact with each other, share the dreams. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, the good news is that's what this is.
Right now.